So like I said, today I'm going to go over with you how to analyze Bradstreet's The Author to Her Book. Yesterday I taught you with Bradstreet's To My Dear and Loving Husband how to analyze a poem. It's going to follow the same kind of pattern. So if you get stuck or you get confused when you're working on this, I would have a look at those slides from yesterday showing how to analyze the different parts of a poem. Another thing I need to talk to you about today is your quiz next week. So let me get to that. So this last week, you had a quiz 1. Some of you still have not taken that. Here's your daily reminder. Please take that quiz. It'll help your grade. So next week's quiz is quiz 2, Puritans, and you'll take that next week, like I said. Same kind of policies for this quiz. Just like your first quiz, I wrote the questions entirely based on the questions you already got in formative work. I think it's really important before quizzing students that you give them some room to practice what they're going to get quizzed on. That to me makes sense. So the questions are the same. You can use your notes. So any notes from last week and this week, so week 3 and 4, you can absolutely use on this quiz and they'll match right up. Remember, quizzes are summative, so they're worth 60% of your grade. The absolute last day to finish or submit quizzes for this quarter is Friday, April 2nd. That might seem a long ways away, but as some of you know, when it gets to the end of the quarter and you've procrastinated, that deadline catches up quick. So I would suggest getting your quizzes done as soon as possible, especially because you've just learned the material for the quiz. So right now I'm going to switch to the poem itself. And if you would do the same, that would be marvelous. Come on. As big as you'll be full screen. There we go. That's a little bit better. So one thing I do whenever I analyze a poem, and especially if I'm giving one to students, is the first time I read through it, like I told you yesterday, the first time you're looking for impressions, what imagery is there? Typically, if I spot figurative language or devices or imagery that really pops into my head, I quick write it down as I'm going through. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then we will go over the answers for this. So after I read this poem with you and translate it a bit, we'll go over the answers on your week 4 handout. So Anne Bradstreet, the author to her book. If you would read silently along with me, that will help your reading skills. True story. If you hear something read while you're reading it, it syncs up better in your brain and improves your reading skills. So the author to her book. Thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain, who after birth didst by my side remain, till snatched from thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad exposed to public view, made thee in rags, halting to the press to trudge, where errors were not lessened, all may judge. So let's talk about what's happening so far before we get too far. So she's calling something an ill-formed offspring of her feeble brains. In other words, you're like a mutant child who after birth did remain by my side. And since she's talking to her book, she's comparing her book or her writing to a mutant kid. So that's the first metaphor I'm spotting. So mutant kid equals book metaphor. I literally write it just like that. So I write my first impression. So it says mutant kid equals book metaphor. So just first impressions as you go helps a lot when you're trying to analyze. At thy return, my blushing was not small. My rambling brat imprint should mother call. I cast thee by as one unfit for light. The visage was so irksome in my sight. Visage means the thing I see. So in other words, she's continuing this metaphor. So it's an extended metaphor. She's continuing this metaphor of calling her writing a brat, something unfit for light, irksome to see. So not only is her writing a mutant, she doesn't want to see it. She's like, get out, gross. Ew. So really this whole beginning part is my writing equals ew. So the visage was so irksome in my sight, yet being mine own, At length, affection would thy blemishes amend, if so I could. A lot of times, poems halfway through, they'll start with one tone or one thought, and then they'll switch to here's the other thought of the poem. And you can tell this because it says yet. So it's kind of like, but on the other hand. So, first, this writing is a mutant, it's gross, get it out of my sight. And now it's, yet you are mine, at length affection would thy blemishes amend, if so I could. So, I wish I could fix you with my love, is what she's saying. I washed thy face, but more defects I saw, and rubbing off a spot, still made a flaw. I stretched thy joints to make thee even feet, yet still thou runs more hobbling than is meet. This is a poetry joke. Basically, this is saying the more I try to fix and edit you, the worse it gets. I can't fix it. In better Yet in better dress to trim thee was my mind, but not save homespun cloth in the house I find. So I'd like to make you look nicer, but all I have is simple cloth. So that could be a metaphor. It could be literally she wishes she had a better cover for her book. In this array, mongst vulgars may thou roam. In critics' hands beware, thou dost not come. And take thy way where yet thou art not known. If for thy father asked, say thou hast none. And for thy mother, she alas is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out of door. So these last parts is now my work, this child is, it's wherever it is. I have no control over what's happening with this kid, like real kids. Like it's gone. It might be hanging amongst vulgars. So in other words, this poem is ugly, gross. I mean, I love it. I wish I could fix it, but now it's hanging out with a bad crowd. Critics can do whatever they want with it. And since I'm poor, I don't really have a recourse for fixing that. So it's kind of a clever little thought on her writing, and it shows us Anne Bradstreet was pretty humble. This is not a brag poem. This is, I don't think my work is good, which every author I've ever met is like that. So let's show you some answers to analyzing this. So if you haven't opened up week 4 yet, please do so, because we're going to go over some of these answers. We're going to analyze this together. All right. So first off is literal meaning. And you'll have these exact questions on your quiz next week, like I said. So what is the poem about? What does the author say? The poem is about the speakers, or you could say Bradstreet, because we know that her poetry is about her, is about the speakers writing and how she feels about it. So like I said yesterday, keep the literal meaning part simple. Just basically, what's this thing about, or what's the main idea? I'll pause so you can write that, or if you already got it done, you can move on to the next one. You can be ahead of me, then you can just check the answers when I go over it. So the next section that we'll have on every poetry analysis in this class is poetic form. And I told you yesterday how to I showed you yesterday how to mark rhyme scheme and how to figure out what kind of poem it is. So let's flip back to the poem and see what kind of rhyme scheme we got. And usually if it has a pattern, we can spot it like that. So our 3 options are Iambic Pentameter, and that's where you have rhyming couplets, where each 2 lines rhyme, next 2 lines rhyme with each other, and so on. Second option is lyrical or formal verse, where we know there's a pattern, but it isn't rhyming couplets. And then our last option is this free verse, where there's no rhyme scheme and it sounds more like a conversation? Well, from reading it, we know it's not free verse because there's definitely rhyme here. So we got to decide what kind of rhyme do we got. So we decide that by looking at the last words and seeing if they rhyme. So brain, remain, yup, that rhymes. So that would be A. So usually in my paper, when I do this, or I would do it in college, I would go through and be like, A. True view, yep, that rhymes. B, now I gotta check, is true or view or brain or remain rhymed elsewhere? No. Okay, so far it's looking like we got rhyming couplets because we got AA BB. Let's see if the third set of lines are that. Usually 3 or 4 lines in, you can tell if it's iambic pentameter. All right, so trudge, judge. Oh yeah, those rhyme. So that's sound C. And then small and call. Yep, those rhyme. We got iambic pentameter. So here's how we write that. And there's really 2 ways you can write this, and it's really up to you. So some people write out every single one of the couplets. I recommend don't do that. If you've already seen the pattern, there's no reason for you to get every single letter of the alphabet on here. You can do this. AA, BB, CC, DD, and then add ellipses, as that shows the pattern continues. And that way you don't have to write out every one. The other way you can write this is you could say this, because it means the same thing. So, or rhyming couplets. If I see either one of these on a test, I count that as correct, provided it matches the poem, of course. So since we know it's rhyming couplets, we know that this kind of poem is iambic pentameter. So if you haven't written that, I'm going to pause for a moment so you can. Okay, imagery is the next thing we're looking at for this poem. So imagery, what specific words does the author include to help paint a picture in your mind as you read it? If you're using phrasing that's exactly from the poem, use a text citation. And I'll be showing you at least 2 examples on here of how to do that. Here, I just decided to give an overview. So I don't have the actual, I don't quote phrases from the text, so I don't need quotation marks. So I just wrote, she describes her writing as a mutant child and a brat. So that's some of the imagery that was really visual to me. And notice I don't have to write every single piece of imagery in the poem, just one that helped paint a picture that really stuck out. For this next prompt for imagery, you are going to choose a phrase from the poem that the author describes in a unique way. A lot of times it'll be an inversion of syntax. So like I said yesterday, that's the order of words in a sentence. So you're going to write the phrase or line and then what it means. So in this case, you'll want to use a text citation. You are welcome to take mine. And notice this repeats this. So I'm just repeating the same imagery I had from before, but instead I'm adding a text citation. So later, if I write about it, I got a citation right there. And sometimes these 2 answers will be different. It's up to you. So I made a text citation to show this imagery of thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain. So that's the phrasing. Now I got to say, well, what does that mean? She is describing the book or writing. It says book in the title, so we can do either one. She's describing the book writing she created as a mutant. Or you could say an off child, or however you want to put it. Pause so you can get that, and then we'll move on to literary devices. All right, so yesterday we talked about how all literary devices basically have the same impact, and that is that they affect the sound of the poem. So your options, and I will give you the options as well in the test. I do not expect you to memorize, oh, literary devices are rhyme, alliteration, onomatopoeia, and repetition. No. In the questions on the quiz, I'm going to phrase it just like this, where I include those options for you. So find a literary device, find a sound device. What I found in the poem was repetition. And a lot of times, if you're having trouble finding something, try repetition. It's usually a surefire bet in most poetry. So the example I have, as you can see on the screen here, of where that repetition is shown, thy and thou are repeated throughout. And those words mean you and your. So it shows she's talking about her book like it's a person. And what is it called when we talk about things that are not people like they're people? Personification. It's not the example I gave for your figurative language, but it's one of the ones you can use. If you had it down, that's right. So I'm going to pause so you can write this, and then we'll move on to figurative language and theme. So I just mentioned personification as one of the options for figurative language. And like I said for the last question, same kind of deal on your quiz. I'm going to include the options in the questions. You can pick which one you think is the best fit for the poem. But of course, the poem on your test is this same poem, so you can use these same answers. All right, so the type of figurative language I found was metaphor. I had mentioned that earlier. You can write metaphor or extended metaphor. I would count both as correct. It works really well when you're giving an example of where it's shown to give the text citation of where you see it. And notice I'm using this one a couple of times. You can absolutely do that. If it fits, use it. So I used again, thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain. And what's the effect or meaning on figurative language? It shows she lacks confidence in her writing because she's comparing it to a mutated or weird child. So as per usual, pause so you can write that, and then on to theme and response to end. So yesterday, we talked about the best places in the poem to find the theme. In other words, what the author's message is about people or about life. Best places to find that are usually the title and the last few lines. So let's go back in it and find what we can find. And I'm going to have you write what you think the theme is, as well as what your response is, but I'm going to help you find it. So the title is the author to our book, the author to her book. So that's clue one. So we know it's a conversation between the author talking about and to her book. And then the last couple lines are usually where you can find some theme. If for thy father ask, say thou hast none, and for thy mother she alas is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out of door. So what does this tell you about people or human behavior or life if the entire poem is talking about, it talks about a mutant child and then the twist is here where it talks about affection and I wish I could fix you, but I can't. And then finally, but I'm poor, so out the door you went. What does that tell you about people? So you're going to write what you think the message is here and why you think it. It works really well to say why, or give the evidence. You will be giving evidence on your test. So let's give you an example of this. And then you're going to write the response because that's your opinion. Did you like it or not? Why or why not? So what do you think the author's message is? I think the theme is writers struggle with what happens once their writing is published out of their control. So why do I think that? I think that because the writer is talking to her book, writing like it is a mutant child that she wishes she could help more. So it depends on what teacher you have on whether or not in other English classes they have you write more for theme. For me, saying what the theme is and then why you think it, what evidence backs that up, say that. So 2 sentences should do it. So at this point, you're going to finish up this handout by writing what you thought of the poem. You should have the other answers from yesterday, but if you missed that or didn't catch all of that, you can either rewatch the video from yesterday, so there's a class video, or you can go back through the slides for week 4 and find the answers. They're all posted. So hopefully you'll get this submitted today. And like I keep saying, please take your quiz. I just realized I didn't show you this last part, that I was still on the poem. So here's the writing. So I'll leave this up for you. And as always, I'll be in the meet if you have any questions. Use your time well.